Okay. Good morning, task force members. This is LK Nandam. I'm the task force chair for the Southwest Central Florida Connector. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and I appreciate your taking time out of your schedule for this webinar. It's been several weeks since we met last in person in Sebring. I want to thank Highlands County again for their hospitality. We've been through and continue to go through a very challenging period with COVID-19. I want to emphasize our continued concern for the health and safety of our state, and personally for you, your families, your friends and colleagues, and your communities. We have received many questions in the past few weeks about when our next person meeting will take place. As you may be aware, the governor and legislature have extended the deadline for the task force report until November 15th. We are confident that we will be able to complete this work by this deadline. At this point, we are abiding by the governor's executive order and taking an abundance of caution. Once further guidance is received, we anticipating scheduling our next meeting within the following month. Our intent is for meetings 6 through 9 all to occur in person before November. We will be in touch with you soon after we get further direction. We also intend to resume community open houses and other public input activities based on new guidance when received. In the meantime, we will continue to provide multiple opportunities for the public to receive information and provide input into the process. We are using virtual meeting abilities to continue task force member and public engagement through the virtual options like this webinar. Before we get started, I want to ask for your patience and understanding today as we adjust to this temporary model due to COVID-19. This is our first meeting via GoToWebinar. Please be understanding of any technical issues that may come up and allow us to address them so any future webinars might be more effective. We have also continued the technical work needed to gather, map, and analyze much of the data you have requested. In fact, I hope you will be pleased to see some of the additional data and maps we are sharing today and providing in an online GIS mapping tool for your review. Our purpose in conducting this webinar today is first catch you up on the technical work that has been occurring since we last met, and specifically we want to focus on your input on two concepts: avoidance areas, which we've been talking about in our previous meetings, and attraction areas. Avoidance areas covered here will include those committed by FDOT in task force meeting number 5, and attraction areas. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Okay, avoidance areas covered here will include those committed by FDOT and those requested by the task force in meeting number 4. The attraction areas are the places where a connection to or service by a new corridor or existing enhanced corridor is designed to accomplish economic, community, environmental, or other goals, such as areas targeted in local plans for economic development. Together, they provide a holistic view of the study area. This data and your input will be a critical foundation for our work moving forward. When we reconvene at meeting 6, we will use this information to define and complete the needs and guiding principles. Before I turn the webinar over to our facilitator, Karen, I want to take a moment to thank our staff for their work to make this webinar possible and get this information out to you. Karen?
Thank you, LK. I'm going to go over the agenda and then do a roll call and some other things today. So I think it's great that we're able to meet again, if virtually and not yet in person. I'm going to talk through the public comment period, logistics for the webinar today, meeting objectives, the agenda, and a brief Florida sunshine reminder. Just to let you know about the public comment period, the public comment period will begin at 10:30 a.m. or as soon as the agenda items are completed. Requests to comment that were received by 5 p.m. yesterday will be addressed during the public comment period. When your name is called, we will unmute your line in order for you to provide comment within your allotted time of 3 minutes. Only one person at a time will be unmuted. If you have self-muted, please make sure to unmute before speaking. If you were not able to submit a request in time to be able to speak today, please email your comments to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us. Some instructions for the task force members today for how to use GoToWebinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available with the other materials on the MCOR's website. So you'll be able to go back and see it if you need to. You will remain muted for the entirety of the presentations, and we will unmute task force members one at a time during the question and answer period. With so many members, it's just too difficult to try to have a traditional type of discussion. Only one person at a time will be unmuted. If you have self-muted, please make sure to unmute before you speak as well. For the question and answer period, we will unmute task force members one at a time for a single round. Do not put the webinar on hold or make another call, as we will hear your hold music at that time. Please do. Today's objectives. Today we're going to receive update on task force activities. And LK has provided some of this in his opening, and you'll hear more throughout. We'll be receiving a briefing on the process for identifying avoidance and attraction areas as input to task force recommendations when we next meet as in person. And we'll describe the homework process for receiving task force member input at the next in-person meeting. And lastly, receive public comment. Today's agenda, we'll start the presentation at about 9:45 and follow up with next steps at about 10:10 and open it up for task force member questions and discussion roughly at 10:15. The public comment period is scheduled to begin at 10:30 or as soon as the agenda items permit. We have received over 120 responses to speaks, which will take approximately 6 hours. We hope task force members will be able to stay on the line, but understand if other commitments take you away. As a quick reminder of the government in the sunshine, this webinar, as well as continues to, and everything else related to task force, continues to remain subject to the sunshine law. Generally speaking, task force members should not communicate either verbally, email, or through a third party to another task force member on items under consideration by the task force. You may communicate on matters unrelated to the task force topics. We have our Attorney General Representative John Fricka on the line with us today, and he can answer questions you may have regarding the sunshine law when we get to the question and answer period. I will now we will now do a task force member roll call. And what I am going to do for the roll call is we've tried to make note of who joined and is attended, and I'm going to go through the list of agencies and contacts. If I do not call your name, please email Marlone and we'll make sure that we get you added to the list afterwards. And I'll also run through the list to try to make sure we pick you up for the question and answer period. So we know that District 1 Secretary LK Nandam is here. District 7 Consultant Project Management Engineer Tracy Hood is here. South District Assistant Director Jennifer Carpenter for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Pam Johnson with the Department of Economic Opportunity is not able to attend today. Robert Richards from the Department of Education is also absent. Jennifer Gomez is sitting in for Stephanie Vick, with the Department of Health. Tom Grafe is here for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Janet Taylor is representing the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Mark Futrell from the Florida Public Service Commission is absent. Eric Anderson is representing the Enterprise Florida. Tim McGrath is representing the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Donald Doubleday is for Career Source Florida. Rochelle Johnson for Volunteer Florida. Melissa Roberts for the South Florida Water Management District. Dave Kramer representing Brian Starford for the Southwest Florida Water Management District. We currently do not have a representative for the Collier Metropolitan Planning Organization. Don Scott for the Lee County MPO is currently absent. Gary Harrell is substituting for Chris Constance for the Charlotte County Punta Gorda MPO. Colin Lambert is here for the Heartland Regional TPO. Nat Birdsong is present for the Polk Transportation Planning Organization. Bill McDaniel for the Southwest Regional Planning Council is excused and will not be present. Pat Steed is here from the Central Florida Regional Planning Council. Jennifer Romberger is replacing Katie Worthington Decker from the Florida Chamber of Commerce. Keith Walpole with the Florida Trucking Association, as far as we know, is not attending. Jerry Burr from the Rural Water Association is here. Bill Ferry from the Florida Internet and Television Association is here. Sherry Ambrose from the Florida Economic Development Council is here. Gary Ritter from the Florida Farm Bureau Federation is here. Bob Jones is representing Jeff Albritton from the Florida Southwestern State College. Glenn Little is here for the South Florida State College. Tamara Sakagawa is representing Dr. Angela Garcia Falconetti from Pope State College. Matt Caldwell is here for Maxwell, Henry, and Simmons. Andrew Dickman is here representing 1,000 Friends of Florida. Paul Gray is representing Audubon, Florida. Elizabeth Fleming is here representing Defenders of Wildlife. Shannon Estenez is here for the Everglades Foundation. Jason Lauritsen is here for the Florida Wildlife Corridor. Wendy Matthews is here for the Nature Conservancy. Penny Taylor with Collier County is not able to attend due to a conflict. Dave Murphy is attending for Cecil Pendergrass for the Lee County Commission. We currently have 4 other county commissioners that have not shown up to the webinar, but we will check before we go to the Q&A. That is Ken Doherty, Cameron, with the substitute of Cameron Pennant for the Charlotte County Commission, Mitchell Wills from the Hendry County Commission, Weston Pryor from the Glades County Commission, and Elton Langford from the DeSoto County Commission. 3 other local representatives that are on the webinar are Mike Thompson from the Hardy County Commission, Ron Hanley from the Highlands County Commission, and Rick Wilson from the Polk County Commission. So with that, that is our roll call. Like I said, we will go through. And with that, I will hand it over to Beth.
Thank you, Karen, and good morning, everyone. Today's webinar is focused on the process for identifying avoidance and attraction areas as input to task force recommendations. This presentation includes 4 key items: an update on the avoidance areas that were identified in prior task force meetings, an introduction to attraction layers. We'll also explain the purpose of introducing them to you at this point in the process, a tutorial on our online GIS tool and its new features. Use of this tool is actually a key component of the last topic, which is the homework process for preparation for the next in-person meeting. As you read in the email from Tori Alston, the homework process will follow the webinar. We'll discuss the details of that process and next steps as we prepare for task force meeting number 6. Here's how we define avoidance areas. They are places with environmental, community, or economic resources where direct impacts from enhanced or new corridors should be avoided. Here are the avoidance areas which were introduced in meeting number 4 and then shown to you again in meeting number 5. FDOT has already committed to the areas that you see. As a reminder, will not impact, which is in magenta, represents areas in which there should be no impact from a transportation corridor. and no new corridor through in pink represents areas with an existing transportation corridor where no new corridors should be considered, but existing facilities or right-of-way could be enhanced. Your input continues to be very important to us, and we'd like to thank you for the thoughtful deliberation in identifying additional avoidance areas to be included in the process. This slide is a representation of the online GIS tool that was originally introduced to you in March. At meeting number 4, you identified 16 additional areas that you'd like to be able to view and categorize. All 16 have been included in the GIS tool, and you can see a complete list of these added layers on the left of this slide. This slide shows an example of how the various layers come together. One example of the avoidance areas added at your request is conservation lands. We've highlighted conservation lands here in green so that you can see how it overlays the original avoidance layers in magenta and pink. Another request was for the inclusion of existing east-west corridors in addition to the north-south corridors previously shown as a consideration for enhancement and connectivity opportunities. We're happy to report that 13 of them are now included in the tool. As an example, see State Road 80 highlighted in the blue circle. To provide you with a holistic view of attributes of the study area, we're introducing a new concept for task force consideration, attraction areas. These are also available to be viewed through the online GIS tool. Attraction areas are placed where a connection to or service by an enhanced or new corridor is desired to accomplish economic, community, environmental, or other goals, such as areas targeted in local plans for economic development. The areas already included in the tool are listed here. Although we are introducing the term attraction areas to you today, many of these examples may look familiar to you. In earlier meetings, they were presented graphically via maps and bar charts on boards, such as the one you see here on the screen, placed around the room or in documents in your packet. The bullets on this slide have been included as layers within the online GIS tool, with some additional work that was done to gather location-specific data where possible. You will not be asked to categorize these areas, but they will be available to you for context as you go through the homework process following today's webinar. As we make our way through the tutorial for the online GIS tool, we'll be assisting you in viewing how these layers might be helpful to you. As always, your input is very important to us. There may be additional attraction areas that you feel should be identified. We'll discuss the opportunity to capture your thoughts on additional attraction areas when we review the homework process. Now that we've reviewed both the avoidance and attraction areas, we'll move into the tutorial that'll show you how you can view them while using the online GIS tool. This is an important aspect for obtaining your input following this webinar and at task force meeting number 6. Today, we'll run through an example of how you might use the tool. The first step is to access the tool using the web address or the link that you see here. This is the same link that was provided to you at task force meeting number 5. We'll begin today by reviewing how to access the layers within the tool. The initial default settings in the tool will bring up the study area, the counties, existing north-south corridors in red, including the new addition of the east-west corridors in blue. And you'll see the avoidance areas that have already been committed to by FDOT. To the left, you see 4 icons that represent layer lists. Committed FDOT avoidance areas will not impact, as well as no new corridor through. Task force number 4 comments, which are avoidance areas you requested at meeting 4, and attraction areas. For the first step, click one of the icons to view specific layers. We're going to begin by selecting the third category, task force number 4 comments. You'll see the list of the 16 added avoidance areas that you requested. We've selected to view conservation lands, which you can now see in green on the map, This provides the opportunity to not only see the locations of these lands, but also to see how they might overlap and interact with the other layers. Next, we'll select an attraction area. In this example, we've decided to view the attraction area opportunity zones. You can see that these are represented by light green hatched areas throughout the region. These are zones identified by the U.S. Treasury where new investment is incentivized, focusing on low-income neighborhoods. In this example, you're able to view opportunity zones within proximity of some of the conservation lands. Although you're not asked to categorize the attraction areas, having a holistic view may have an impact on how you decide to categorize an avoidance area. Let's review the homework process. There are 5 steps that we'll go through briefly. Using the online GIS tool to review the avoidance and attraction areas identified to date, reviewing the avoidance areas, reviewing the attraction areas, then participating in an individual technical briefing with the production team to review and answer your questions on the data, tool, and process, and finally, preparing to categorize the avoidance areas. As a reminder, to access the online GIS tool, you'll click on the link which you saw earlier in the presentation. Please familiarize yourself with the tool. Be sure to review the avoidance areas and familiarize yourself with how they are reflected in the tool. Remember, there are 2 different groupings of avoidance areas, those that have already been committed to by FDOT and those that you requested at meeting number 4. The attraction areas that have been added are shown again here. These areas are based on data presented by FDOT or suggestions by task force members at prior meetings. If there are other attraction areas that you believe would be helpful to identify needs to be addressed by the corridor, it's important that you identify them and propose them to the task force at meeting 6. The production staff or facilitator will be in touch with you soon to finalize a technical briefing at your convenience during the next few weeks. Given the current need to continue social distancing, we anticipate the briefing will be conducted via GoToMeeting, so we would suggest that you schedule it at a time when you can be in front of your computer. The briefing will review the online GIS tool and the data which has been collected, as well as address any questions that you may have. One key step in the homework process is to understand the 4 categories that you see here and to consider how you might apply them to the additional avoidance areas requested by you at meeting 4. You'll be able to share your thoughts with fellow task force members at meeting number 6. The work that you're doing is critical to refining draft needs and guiding principles and developing consensus for your ultimate deliverable, the task force report. Your input will guide FDOT in later phases for identifying paths and courses as well as implementation strategies. Let's look at how this works. In past meetings, you've been providing input to drafts of both high-level needs and guiding principles. We want to show you examples of how these directly relate to the data and to one another, and how these can instruct project development and implementation. So let's look at an example. Remember the avoidance area conservation lands which we viewed before? This area contributed to identifying the first draft need shown on the slide, preservation and expansion of conservation areas. Based on this need, a draft guiding principle was developed. Prioritize avoidance to and expansion of the conservation of natural resources. That principle will instruct project development and implementation. One example shown here would mean that the ultimate alignment avoids existing conservation areas to the maximum extent possible, while also leveraging the ability to acquire land for preservation. Let's look at a second example. The tool includes attraction areas depicting locations of existing employers, opportunity zones, and potential opportunity and investment areas. These areas contributed to identifying the second draft need shown on the slide, job creation, particularly in areas with high unemployment and/or poverty rates. Based on this need, a draft guiding principle was developed, which states, support local and regional economic development and land use plans. As one example, this principle could lead to an alignment or an access point, such as an interchange or frontage road, connecting the corridor to a regional roadway network with compatible land uses. As we continue through the remaining meetings, we'll continue to work with you to ensure we're connecting the dots to indicate the relevance and importance of the work you're doing. This concludes the presentation portion of the webinar, so I'd now like to turn the meeting back over to Elke to discuss next steps.
I thank you, Karen and Beth, for the overview. I'd like to recap a few of the next steps before we begin the task force question and answer period. Today's presentation, webinar recording, and GIS link will be posted on the website. Our technical staff will continue to be in contact with you for any assistance you may need. I know this is a very challenging time, and many of you are dealing with unusual schedules and work environments and urgent demands for your time. Please know we are ready to adapt your schedule and support you in any way we can. During this time, to effectively stay engaged in the task force process, we will continue to explore and utilize virtual means of engagement until social distancing restrictions are loosened and allow us to meet in person again. Our goal is to resume face-to-face meetings in June or as soon as social distancing guidance permits us to convene. We will be looking forward to further our conversations on the homework process and finalizing needs and guiding principles in the future task force meetings. So we meet the intent and the charge that's given by the legislature and the governor. Now we will turn it over to Karen for task force member questions. Karen?
Thank you, Elke. So we're now going to open it up for questions from the task force before we begin our public comment period. In addition to Elke, John Fricka, myself, and Beth, the following FDOT representatives are also on the webinar to answer your questions during this time. Will Watts, the FDOT Chief Engineer, Wei Shen, the FDOT Chief Planner, and Marlon Becerra, the Production Lead. We are going to go through all task force members one at a time to be sure each of you has an opportunity to ask questions. The question and answer period will be related to the content from today's webinar. The webinar is recorded, and you, of course, it will be posted on the website, and you'll be able to review it as often or as frequently as you want. Technical briefings will also help with the details on the layers. So for today's meeting, we're looking you to focus on the process to the extent possible. After we've completed one round this way, if we have the time, we will look to providing alternate input, a second round or additional input on the webinar questions. So as I said, as Elke said, please be patient with us as we unmute and mute you all. It may take us a little bit of time to find you among the 300 plus attendees on our list. And I'm going to start with the college's representatives this morning. We've done a lot of learning, so I think they're the ones adept at learning, so I'll start with them and then proceed to the MPOs. So the first three task force members I'm going to call on will be Bob Jones, Glenn Little, and then Tamara. So Bob, if I can, I'm going to unmute you if you would like, if you have any questions that you would like to provide to us. Bob, are you there?
Yes, thank you. No questions, but thank you.
All right, thank you. Glenn, you're up next.
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Karen?
Yes, thanks, Glenn.
Yeah, I have no questions, just pleased that we're moving forward.
All right, great, thank you. Tamara, you will be next, and then I'll start with the MPOs. Let's see if you registered that way. Are you open, Tamara?
Yes, you found me. I have no questions, but I just wanted to say thank you, as always, for organizing even under these conditions.
Wonderful. So then I'm going to start with the MPOs, and we will begin with Nat Birdsong, and then Nat Birdsong, and then Donald Scott, and Chris Constance or Gary Harrell. So Nat, do you want to go first? Let me find you. There you are. You should be unmuted.
Okay. Good morning to everyone. I was just wondering, in light of the virus, the coronavirus, is the schedule going to be revised as it relates to our final deliverables?
So Will or Wei Wei, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, this is Will Watts. So legislature did extend the delivery date from October 1st to November 15th. And I'm sure if COVID-19 continues to impact us greatly, as it has been, that date will be moved out to ensure the task force can complete and have adequate time to complete their assignment.
Okay, that was my only question. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Don Scott, followed by Gary Harrell. So Don, you're unmuted.
Okay. On the map where you showed the east-west roadways in Polk County, I recognize State Road 16 I-4. What was that other east-west connection?
Hey, Marlon, you want to speak on that one?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, on that map, I was looking at the different east-west connections, and there were 3 in Polk County. 2 of them are State Road 60 and I-4. What was that other east-west connection?
Or 1792.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
That's it.
All right. Thanks, Don. So Gary Harrell is up next, followed by Chris Constance, who's representing Chris Constance, excuse me, unless Chris has joined us.
Okay.
So
Yes, this is Gary Harrell. Commissioner Constance has got Board of County Commissioner meetings that he's going right now. I'm not sure. As soon as that's over, I think he'll join. But at this point, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Let's see. Colin Lambert is up next, followed by, we'll go into the regional planning councils, which will be Pat Steed. So Colin, you want to go next? Oh, you are self-muted? You need to unmute yourself.
Now I'm out. I'm good now.
Yeah.
I'm good. So I was pretty impressed with the map and the amount of data that's on there, the ease of user friendliness. I thought it was it looks really nice. I was working on it while you were talking, and pretty impressed. I don't have any questions, but I appreciate the efforts of everybody here.
Great. So Pat Steed, you're up next, and then I'm going to continue with the community representatives, which will be Jennifer Romberger. So, there you go, Pat.
Thank you. This is Pat Steed. I just want to say it was an excellent presentation. I think very clear in process. I just had one question because it went by very quickly. When we were looking at avoidance areas, did that include schools on the list? We had discussed that previously, and I just wasn't sure it was on the list.
Hey, Marlon, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, to my knowledge, they have been included.
Okay, thank you.
All right, then Jennifer Romberger is substituting for Katie Worthington Decker. You're up next, and that'll be followed by Jerry Burr. So you're self-muted, Jennifer, I think?
Here we go.
There you
Karen,
go.
it's actually Katie. I was able to make it on the call instead of Jennifer.
Oh, okay, great,
Yeah.
Katie.
And good presentation. I have no questions this morning. Thank you.
Okay. I don't believe Keith Ball managed to join us. So Jerry Burr, you will be next, followed by Bill Ferry. So let me. Jerry, you're self-muted as well. If you would unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi, yeah, Jerry Buer. I had no questions at this time. Thank you for your presentation. Very good.
Bill Ferry, and then we'll follow up with Sherry Ambrose. There you go, Bill. There you go, Bill.
Oh, hey, Bill Ferry here. I didn't hear what you just said. It's Bill Ferry of the Florida Internet and Television Association. It's kind of scary when the internet guy loses a little bit of internet connectivity. But I think you asked, do I have any questions? I don't really. I guess the one question I would have is, I did see the point about low income or poverty being a factor, which is good. Was curious, what was the data source for that? Is that census block information? And I guess the other comment, I know we're doing questions, but maybe a comment is, have we looked at ethnicity with regard to low income or poverty? It might be useful in planning corridor location from the standpoint, do you have a particular ethnicity, whether it's Native American or something? Do we have a pocket of population there that could benefit from a corridor? That could be another layer that you might explore. Thanks.
So, Malone, do you know those?
Yeah, we use census block. And I believe that we have the ethnicity data also. I will double check that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Great, so Sherry Ambrose, you're up next. Followed by Gary Ritter. Sherry, are you there by phone? Okay, we'll come back to Sherry and go to Gary Ritter, who will be followed by Matt Caldwell. There you go, Gary.
Can you hear me out? Yeah, I see.
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Nice presentation, and I apologize if I'm asking a redundant question here, but I'm assuming we have cultural resources covered along the entire corridor area.
Marlon, you want to expand on that?
Yeah, depending on the potential location of the path courses, we can basically do an assessment of all the databases for cultural resources. We have, I believe, some of those elements in the GIS, or it can be incorporated.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. That's all I had.
Thank you. So Matt Caldwell, you're next, and that'll be followed by Wendy Matthews. And we really are putting our technical folks through the ringer this morning, asking all these detailed questions. So Matt?
Oh, there we go. No, all good.
Great. And then Wendy Matthews will start into the environmental groups. There you go, Wendy.
Hey, good morning. Yes, I'd like to also thank the staff for putting together all of the data on that map. It is very user-friendly. I did want to make one point, and then I have a question. The managed area, the FNA managed area layer is updated quarterly. And I just want to make sure that as we continue through our work that their quarterly updates are also incorporated as new managed lands are purchased. Excuse me. Also, could you expand a little bit on the prioritization homework we're expected to do? I didn't quite understand what we're prioritizing.
Okay, great question. This is Will Watts again. So the two homework assignments to help prepare everybody for task force meeting number 6. So we've got kind of 2 buckets of information, the avoidance areas as well as the attraction areas. So for the attraction areas, it's that 4th grouping of layers. And we just want to know what's important to you and your community. So help us prioritize those just as talking points when we regroup in task force meeting number 6 and as you meet with our technical advisors with the small group. So it's just trying to, it's another way of trying to understand what the needs are for the corridor and what are your prioritization needs in your area.
Okay.
Does that help?
Okay. Yeah, that helps, Will. Thank you. And I'm going to digest the GIS information and come back with more questions at a later date, I'm sure. But thank you.
Great.
Thank you. So Jason Lauritsen, you're up next, and then I'll bring up Shannon Estenos afterwards. So you should be
Thank you.
unmuted.
This is Jason Lauritsen from the Florida Wildlife Corridor. I don't have any questions, but I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to go over the GIS data and appreciate the responsiveness to include the materials that have been requested. So thank you.
Great. Shannon, you are self-muted if you wanted to unmute. There you go.
Good morning. I don't have any questions at this time. Just hoping everyone is safe and healthy, and it's good to hear everyone's voices. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Next up will be Elizabeth Fleming, and then Paul Gray, and then Andrew Dickman. So Elizabeth, unmute you. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. All right. Takes a minute.
Okay. All right. Yes. Thank you for preparing the materials. It is a lot to absorb and understand and be able to put into use. I have a question about the technical briefing, because I think even previous to the briefing, FDOT is setting up individual conversations. Is that to explain the technical briefing, or is that the technical briefing?
Hey, Elizabeth, this is Will again. Yeah, that's to help you digest all this data. It is a lot of data. We understand. We're just trying to accommodate all the requests. It allows you to go a little deeper dive on any questions, and you'll have the folks on the call directly with you. That way you can spend all the time you need in asking those questions.
So that is the briefing, is the conversation. So yes, it's not a, I thought that was a go-to meeting to maybe look at maps or something.
It is. I mean, we're still trying to practice social distancing right now, so we're trying to use whatever means we have at our fingertips to help communicate. Weiwei's got a few comments as well.
Hey, Elizabeth, this is Weiwei. If there's a need to get into more of the data collaboration, multiple technical briefings can be scheduled just to make sure that we address all your concerns.
Okay, all right. And just a comment, I understand, I think I understand what our role is on these task forces, and to look at the data and to complete these exercises that we're doing each time. But, you know, the coronavirus has knocked the whole world kilter. And I really do hope, I'm glad that you said that, Will, that if there's a need to extend this process due to all these unforeseen circumstances and changes. For example, I may not be able to participate in in-person meetings. In May, our organization has a policy that no matter who opens up what business, where, and at what speed, our organization is making its own decisions, and I am not allowed to travel through the month of May. So if this process continues with in-person meetings, I can't participate. So I do hope that we can be flexible and understand that, you know, this is totally unprecedented and this project is going to alter the state of Florida forever if it goes forward. And I think since everything else is in limbo, it seems hard to believe that this process to plan for 3 entirely new highways could just go full speed ahead. So I just wanted to say that.
So great comments, Elizabeth. We're certainly going to be nimble as we get through the COVID-19 crisis. And, you know, May doesn't look real probable for face-to-face, tell you the truth right now. So we're going to be as flexible and try to accommodate every member the best we can, including the public, with whatever means we have. So today's first attempt at virtual meetings is that, to try to accommodate what we can. But we do value the face-to-face because I think we do get some pretty robust and valuable conversations. So just bear with us, Elizabeth. We're gonna work through it and keep everybody informed as we move forward. And I agree, it's unprecedented.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Paul Gray is next, followed by Andrew Dickman.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, first off, I was kind of slow in getting that link, so if you could please put the link back up so those of us who didn't catch it when it went by can get on it. And then the second thing, I'm still kind of curious about how we input you guys. When I hear homework, I spent too much time in school and it makes me paranoid. Is there going to be, is this kind of free form? If we want to send you written comments, we can do it, or is there kind of a test or a survey that you wanted comments on specific topics and we could respond to questions? I just was kind of curious of the format for you guys to take input.
Yeah, great question. Yeah. So, you know, the homework assignment is really just trying to prepare the task force members to have a robust discussion on both attraction and avoidance areas. So we're not really asking for a turn-in homework assignment, so to speak, but we're going to give you some worksheets where you can take your own notes and help formulate some opinions and some priorities. And then the technical one-on-ones will help answer any questions. The hope is that you'll have your own notes in front of you when we do discuss guiding principles and further refine the guiding principles in future task force meetings.
Okay, thanks. That helps. And I really appreciate all the work you guys have done to make all this data available to us. So thank you.
Thank you.
So Andrew Dickman, you are up and also self-muted. You want to next, and then Melissa Roberts will be after you. So Andrew Dickman, you're self-muted if you want to unmute yourself. Okay, we'll come back to Andrew.
Mine says I'm still unmuted, so maybe you need to click to Andrew, or this is Paul.
We can have more than one unmuted. Thank you. So he's self-muted. So then I'll move on to Melissa. There you go, Melissa.
Hi, good morning. I don't have any questions at this time.
All right, thank you. Followed by Dave Kramer and Dave Murphy. Dave Kramer representing Brian Stark. There you go.
No, this is Dave here. I just saw it get unmuted. We don't have any comments at this time. Thanks.
Okay, great. So it looks like we may have lost. We will come back around to Dave Murphy as well. So Cameron Pennant, who's representing Ken Doherty. And after Cameron will be Mike Thompson.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you and just make it clear that I've been here since 9:15 a.m. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knew. So, but thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you, Cameron, for letting me know that you were here. We did capture you as attendees along with Robert Richards and Don Scott. So, so after Cameron is Mike Thompson, followed by Ron Handley. Mike, you are self-muted. If you want to unmute, there you go.
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I don't have any questions. I want to thank everyone for your efforts on this. I do prefer the face-to-face meetings. I'm not a big webinar go-to meeting fan, but I guess we do what we have to do in the situation. So I want to thank everyone, and I don't have anything. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. So Ron Handley's up and be followed by Rick Wilson. Ron, you're unmuted.
Yeah, that would be fine. Got me? Ron Handley?
Yes.
Good morning. Very good presentation. I appreciate it. We don't have any questions at this time.
Okay. Thank you. Rick Wilson is next, and then we'll move into the state organizations with Jennifer Carpenter.
Yes, yes, very good presentation, especially in these trying times, but don't have any questions.
Great, thank you. Jennifer, and then after you will be Robert Richards.
Good morning. Thank you for the presentation and for those tools. I had a couple questions, clarifying questions about the homework, which have been answered. So I think that I am good and glad to hear everybody today.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So Robert Richards is next, followed by Jennifer Gomez, substituting for Stephanie Vick. Okay, we will skip Robert Richards, Jennifer Gomez. And then you'll be followed by Tom Grave and then Janet Taylor.
No questions for Jennifer Gomez.
Great, thank you. Tom, you're up. Tom Grave. And then you're unmuted. Can you hear us? Okay, I think some of the people that have using their phone we're struggling with. So Tom is another one we'll round back to. Janet Taylor.
Good morning. An excellent presentation. I have no questions at this time, but I just want everybody to stay safe.
All right. Thank you. Thomas, did you get on? Tom? Okay. Next up is then Eric Anderson, followed by Tim McGrath.
Muted.
Okay.
I don't have
Eric
any
Anderson?
questions at this time.
Unmuted.
I don't have any questions at this time.
Thank you. Tim McGrath?
Yeah, good morning. I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay. Donna Doubleday, and then you'll be followed by Rochelle Johnson.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Good job. I also would like to thank everyone who went before me because my questions have been asked and answered. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you.
Muted.
Rochelle is up, and then we'll follow by Tracy, and then go back to a few people that we couldn't get on the first time. Rochelle Johnson, there you go.
Good morning, all. I do not have any questions at this time.
Unmuted. Muted. Unmuted.
Great. Then I'm going to move on to Tracy. Tracy Hood.
There you go. Now I got the green light. I've got no comments or concerns.
Okay. So then I know we had some difficulties with Andrew Dickman, Sherry Ambrose. Okay, Sherry Ambrose was our first, so I'm going to try Sherry really quickly. And then Andrew Dickman again, and Dave Murphy. So Sherry. Okay. Andrew Dickman. Andrew, you're self-muted. If you can unmute yourself. And then Dave Murphy. We'll try one more time. Okay, so that's everyone once through the round robin. And we're very close to 10:30. Most people did not have a lot of questions, and or we'll save them until the technical briefing in terms of the technical questions. So, okay.
All right, task force members, I want to thank you for welcoming this form of engagement. Some good questions, and I understand it's a lot of information for you to process. So take the opportunity to do the technical briefings when you talk to our technical staff if you have any further questions. This concludes our formal presentation for today. We will move on to the public comment portion of our webinar. I want to continue to emphasize how important this input is to the process, and that public comment during our meetings and webinars is not the only way for the public to provide their input to us. Public comments may be submitted at any time to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us. That's the email address, and will become part of the public record. So Karen, let's go ahead and begin the public comment period.
Great. Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning, requests to comment that were received by 5 p.m. yesterday will be addressed during this public comment period in the order the request was made. If you do not respond when your name is called, you will be provided a second chance at the end of the public comment period. We will identify 3 speakers at a time so that you can prepare to comment. When your name is called to actually speak, we will unmute your line in order for you to provide comment within your allotted time of 3 minutes. You will hear a tone when you have 30 seconds remaining, and another tone when your time is up at 3 minutes. The line will be muted after 3 minutes, So please keep your eye on the clock and listen for the tones. If you have more information to share with a group, you can provide additional comments in writing for further consideration, which can be sent anytime to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us. Only one person at a time will be unmuted. If you have self-muted, as you saw with some of the task force members, please be sure to unmute before speaking. If you did not submit your request in time to be able to speak today, please email your comments to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us. Excuse me. So with that, I am going to call the first three commenters that have submitted requests. We will provide your name and your location and then ask you to speak. So the first three will be Ethan Gilbert from Orlando, Levi Hannon from Tallahassee, and Chris Costello from Nokomis in Sarasota County. So Ethan Gilbert. All right, have not seeing Ethan Gilbert at this point. Levi Hannon.
You'll be able to do years up and running, almost 3,000 tests a day. The one machine is going to be 1,000. We have Siemens in our lab, should be ready by the end of May to test for antibodies as well.
Muted.
So we're looking for Levi Hannon.
Unmuted.
The next on the list is Chris Costello.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, they are on. You're on. Thank you.
You can hear me. Great. Yes, my name is Chris Costello. I live in Nokomis, Florida, and I'm an organizing manager for the Sierra Club. Good morning. So our economy has been all but shut down, and people are fighting for their lives or terrified this virus will take a loved one. But FDOT has a webinar to keep the MCOR process going. And with task force member homework and briefings completed out of public view, I just have to say, really, the task force process was opaque and fruitless through 7 months of in-person meetings. And while FDOT staff may be thrilled that the webinar has removed the public's right to visually display their opposition outside of the public comment period, the public is not. This webinar adds insult to injury. It is the opposite of democracy in action. I expect task force members and FDOT staff who actually believe in transparency, democracy, and the responsibility of the state government to provide for its citizens to demand that this farce end. Exit now, call it off. Thank you.
Next up is Brian Barnes from Port Charlotte. Okay. Next up is Sandra Hodge from Coral Gables. Next up, Kevin Berth from LaBelle. Next up is Jackson Hurst from Kennesaw, Georgia. You are unmuted.
Hi, I am in support of MCORS. It's desperately needed, especially for the state of Florida, because it will remove the amount of traffic whenever there is a major hurricane, especially on 75, 95, and 10. And if I may, I do have a suggestion for a possible route for Southwest Florida. The beginning point would be at the Polk Parkway, US 98 interchange, follow US 98 to US 17 in Barstow, and basically follow US 17 all the way down to Port Charlotte with a potential split at Fort Meade, going through to the east of Wauchula and Bonita Springs in Hardy County, and going east of Arcadia, going through Charlotte County, avoiding the conservation areas, and Hendry and Collier County as well, and intersecting 75 at Naples.
Thank you, Jackson. Next up is Margot Robinson from Newport Richey. Carmen Monroe from Fort Myers, Florida. Next up is Dennis Blake from Old Town, Florida. Next up is Stella Myers from Fort Myers, Florida. Next up is Douglas Gable from Winter Haven, Florida. Next up is Marion Ryan from Winter Haven, Florida.
Yes, this is Marion Ryan. I'm from Winter Haven. It is alleged that the MCORS will improve different types of infrastructure, including broadband and water and sewer services. These needed services are currently secondary to the toll roads, which are not needed and not wanted except by the few people and businesses that will reap huge financial benefits. With the coronavirus pandemic, schools have moved to at-home online classes, and working remotely from home has become the new norm for many. Access to broadband has become a necessity, a means to education and earning a living. Rural areas that struggle with lack of access or inconsistencies in broadband strength need a remedy now, not years after these unneeded and unwanted toll roads are plowed through our remaining rural and wild lands. In addition, the claim for new hurricane evacuation routes is even more ludicrous in the face of COVID-19. Social distancing requirements will drop the capacity of Polk County area shelters from 70,000 to about 11,000. This fact further validates the already established need for more locations to shelter in place and keep people off the roads during a hurricane. The legislature's priorities need to be realigned with reality. The only reasonable response to the M-Course is to stop it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Next up is Hans Arndt from Lakeland, Florida.
Hello, my name is Hans Arndt. I'm actually not too certain if I'm really speaking to the right commission here. On the website, it states that M-Course addresses issues related to all types of infrastructure, not just roads, but it seems after listening to this webinar that the primary focus is actually roads. So I'll try to be quick with my comments. So the central core of Florida has definitely needed infrastructure investment for quite some time. We've needed roads for a long time, and I've noticed that in the last 10 years, Florida's population has grown 15%, putting millions of additional drivers on the road. And investment in infrastructure, unfortunately, has not kept up with this growth. But the real reason that I am here today is to speak about the unique challenges the central core of Florida faces when it comes to internet connectivity. Currently, we're living under an umbrella of a pandemic, which has really highlighted the importance of internet connectivity to the lives of Floridians. And unfortunately, those of us living in Florida, especially the central part of Florida, are still struggling to get reliable, high-speed internet. And you know, many state and federal governments have recognized the importance of internet connectivity, but I think that the way they've tried to build these networks is to simply give incumbent internet service providers cash, and I don't think that's the correct way to do it. So I think that the state of Florida should foster competition in the internet service provider market by developing municipal fiber networks. These networks are actually in use throughout the entire country right now, and I would like to see the state of Florida look into that. So, you know, I think investing in roads is great. We need it, but I certainly hope the M-Course task force takes a look at the importance of broadband connectivity. It is absolutely crucial. And I certainly hope that we don't just gloss over that for just more asphalt. Fiber internet is the road of the future, and we need it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hans. Next up is Michael Harder. Okay, next up is Pat Branch from Tampa, Florida. Okay, next up is George Neves from Denellen, Florida. Okay, next up is Eugene Kelly from Brooksville, Florida.
Hello, my name's Eugene Kelly. I'm representing the Florida Native Plant Society. I have spoken at, I believe, all of your previous meetings, and my focus then has been on protecting natural resources. I do want to point to something different today that I think is really underscored by the fact that we're having this meeting online. There's been so much urgency attached to this entire process, and it's made me uncomfortable that something of this magnitude is being so rushed and based on so many assumptions that are really spurious at best. A couple things have already been mentioned that I believe are part of those assumptions. For example, we need enhanced ability for people to evacuate during hurricanes, despite the fact that emergency management professionals say sheltering in place is the preferred approach. We were just speaking about bringing broadband internet to rural parts of the state. And the assumption seems to be that in order to make that happen, we need to build limited access toll roads. The assumption that has always made me most uncomfortable is that Florida is going to continue to grow the way it has been for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And the numbers, I've heard a number of task force members representing local government stand up and say, they're going to keep coming. They're not going to stop. Well, I think we're going to see that there is going to be a pause in the growth rate here in Florida. I don't think we can assume that we have to build these roads to accommodate growth that's going to occur over the next 40, 50 years, because it's based on the assumption that Florida is going to continue to be as attractive a place as it is now. And I just do not see this assumption about a continued growth rate of 900 to 1,000 residents a day being at all realistic. I know the task force has discussed whether no build is an alternative you can recommend. I think somebody needs to put the brakes on this, and whether FDOT and the legislature wants to hear it or not, I believe you need to be making a recommendation for no build. Put the brakes on this train. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Next up is Ann Hardy. Ann Hardy, you are unmuted. Next up is John Kilgore from Tarpon Springs, Florida. Next up is Seabon Gale from Lakeland, Florida. Next up is Alicia Gonzalez from Cutler Bay, Florida, and you are unmuted. Say it again. Alicia Gonzalez, you are unmuted.
Yes, I don't have any comments. Thank you so much.
Next up is Delita Singh from Ocoee, Florida. Next up is Alex Priester from Winter Park, Florida. Next up is George Kane from Tampa, Florida. Next up is Judy Wirtz Strickland from Acadia, Florida. Okay, next up is Stephen Turner from Lake Placid, Florida, and you are unmuted.
No comments, thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Next up is Michael McGrath from Fort Myers, Florida. You are unmuted.
Hello, can folks hear me?
Yes, sir, we
Hello,
can.
Okay, very good. Hello, my name is Mike McGrath, and I'm an organizer for the Sierra Club, and I'm a resident of Lee County. Good morning. It's become fashionable to promote MCORs by holding rural communities hostage, by forcing them to choose between broadband connectivity and a highway that runs straight through their backyard, or no broadband at all. This is no choice at all because it's just not the truth. There are alternatives that are both cheaper, less environmentally damaging, and can accomplish the same goal. For example, aerial broadband is a well-documented service that can be done independently of road construction and for a fraction of the costs. We need real solutions, not toll roads to ruin. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next up is Lindsay Cross from St. Petersburg, Florida. You are unmuted.
Good morning. Good morning. This is Lindsay Cross. I'm with Florida Conservation Voters. It's good to hear everyone on the call this morning. Of course, as we know, this COVID-19 pandemic is really demonstrating how vulnerable our state can be. We know from recent data and reports that there's a link between poor air quality and increased mortality from COVID-19. The Everglades Foundation recently penned an op-ed about how abundant and clean fresh water is critical for us to maintain good personal hygiene. And we've also seen how firsthand that having local food from our Florida farms can enhance our food security. All of these will be in jeopardy if we build this road to ruin. The benefits that are promised to small rural communities like broadband come with too many strings attached, including destruction of our natural areas, degradation of our water resources, and dismantling of their rural lifestyles. Our state will be grappling with economic uncertainty for years to come, and we still don't know how and when we will be reopening our state. The legislature and FDOT have never been able to show that this project is economically viable. During good economic times, which we may categorize as a few months prior to this project was wasteful and unnecessary. Now, during a global health and economic crisis, building these roads would be negligent. Let's stop this charade and say no to the roads to ruin. As always, and even more so now, the only responsible option is no build. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Next up is Joe Gomez from Miami, Florida. Okay, next up is Paul Boland from Naples, Florida. Next up is Joseph Sheffield from Old Town, Florida. Next up is Michael Sachs from Ocala, Florida. Next up is Lynn Sparks from Monticello, Florida. Next up is Bob Frick from Tampa, Florida. Next up is Adam Rose from Brandon, Florida, and you are unmuted.
No comments.
Thank you, Adam. Next up is Kimberly Heath from Delray Beach.
Hear me?
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Hi. I
I'm really happy to be a part of this. I've been wanting to come to your meetings for a while, but it was hard for me to get out of work to come all the way over here to speak. So I hope that if you guys continue these, that you'll have like an online component to it, because it makes it way more accessible. Although I agree that, you know, in-person meetings would probably be, you know, better than just having all online meetings. But anyways, I've grown up in Florida my entire life, and it became immediately apparent, you know, from my childhood that there is just wholesale destruction in Florida, and I don't think anybody's mentioned it yet, although you've been talking about the destruction of natural areas, but this road goes right through the last remaining Florida panther habitat. At any given time, there's only about 200 panthers left in Florida in the wild, and they live in the area of this road. And people have been trying for years to just prevent this area from getting more development, and this road specifically intends to bring development into the area, which is against the interests of taxpayers, because we've been funding the conservation of the Florida panther, you know, so many millions of dollars probably, just trying to restore the panther to this area. It's our state animal. And the idea that with this road that I could see the panther become extinct in my lifetime, it makes it feel like this is like a Black Mirror episode, that this could even be going forward. There's so many things wrong with this, not just the Florida panther. You know, that's the most appalling thing to me personally, but the idea that we have this road that is in the law to build, and yet it didn't go through the routes of normally roads are built with, you know, research and time, and people in the community want it, but this road clearly, I can't understand how anybody else could see it any differently, that this road is not just a handout to toll company people. It's so obvious that that's the case. And you guys at the task force, you're having to identify and you know, create this project from nothing. They've given you no information, no resources. You're having to come up with all the criteria yourself. It's so ridiculous. And then they say that they're going to bring internet. Well, if they had known that internet was important to communities, they should use our tax dollars for that, instead of a road that they're going to tax us to drive on. Yeah, I also agree with that. The idea that this is going to help with hurricane evacuations is like, there's no research behind that either. I've been living in South Florida my whole life, and the only thing that roads and construction have done is just create urban sprawl.
Thank you. Next up is Ned Baer from Tampa, Florida. Next up is Jay Calhoun from Holmes Beach, Florida. Next up is Pamela McElroy from Gainesville, Florida. Next up is John Myers from Inglewood, Florida. You are unmuted.
Yes, hello, thank you. My name is John Myers. I live in Inglewood, Florida. I've lived in the Inglewood, Venice area for about 15 years now. And in the last few years, you know, my experience has been seriously degraded, primarily because of traffic congestion. Traffic congestion has just gotten to be so bad. You see just about every vacant piece of land in this whole area is being built upon by real estate developers. And personally, you know, I'm opposed to just about everything that involves building new homes in encouraging people to come to Florida. I think we need to discourage people from coming to Florida. And I feel that perhaps the funds that would be used to build the roads would be better used to mitigate sea level rise on our coasts and to repair from hurricane damage we can expect from more extreme weather. I'm also very concerned about that the wildlife corridors would be maintained. I have very strong concerns about protecting the Florida panthers. And so basically, I'm opposed to the building of these toll roads. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Next up is A. Warren from Homestead, Florida. Next up is Loretta Welpin from Homosassa, Florida. Next up is Helen Hoffman from the Villages, Florida. Next up is Lisa DiCarlo from Fort Myers, Florida. Next up is Mark Haver from Lakeland, Florida. You are unmuted.
Hi, I want to first of all say thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to protest these toll roads. My name is Mark, I'm 21 years old, I'm from Lakeland, Florida, and I'm probably the biggest stakeholder in this decision. The future of Florida's environment and infrastructure is to be enjoyed by me the most, considering my age, and I really don't think this is the best path. I think someone was talking about the Florida Panther. Are we really willing to sacrifice the last lands in Florida that we have here for a road? I live on I-4. I pay tolls all the time, and now y'all want me to pay more tolls to go through land that could be used for conservation that my tax dollars are already going towards? It really just doesn't make any sense to me, not to mention the fact that this state is wildly susceptible to things like sea level rise, to hurricanes, to all these things that we should be investing our money into, like climate resilience. But instead, our solution is to build more roads, which is going to cause more carbon emissions, which is going to continue to make these hurricanes worse and more frequent. And there's no evidence that these roads are going to help us evacuate the state in the case of a hurricane. So I really don't understand how this is any solution to anything that is a problem in the state. I'm just so exasperated at the thought that when we have so much money that could be allocated toward a different transportation or infrastructure project, whether it's retrofitting existing infrastructure to be climate resilient for sea level rise, even just to improve it. Like, I'm tired of driving on these really bad roads. And now you're telling me that, oh, we want you to pay for it by the tolls through land that could cause the extinction of the Florida Panther, which my tax dollars are going to, while providing no solutions for public transit. I'm sorry, but like, come on. I understand that you all are doing what you can to be able to understand public comment, and I really appreciate the chance, but to me it just, sorry?
You have 1 minute.
Thank you. But to me, it like just doesn't make sense. I really think that everyone should #exit now. These roads will lead to ruin for the state of Florida. And once again, as a 21-year-old, as the greatest stakeholder in the future of Florida's roads and the environment, this is a nonsensical solution to the problems that we actually have in Florida. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next up is Bill Mattier from Bradenton, Florida. You are unmuted.
All right, thank you. My name is Bill Maturo. I'm from Bradenton. The Federal Highway Traffic Safety Administration recommends that a high-speed traffic lane be at least 12 feet wide. If we assume that the toll roads will be 6 lanes, add in the shoulder-to-shoulder distance, it can be estimated that the highways will be about 100 feet wide. Doing a little elementary math, calculations, multiply that 100 feet by 330 miles and add in on and off ramps, rest areas, and other paved areas, it can be easily amount to approximately 10,000 acres of pavement. For perspective, Highland Hammock State Park in the middle of Florida is 9,000 acres large. Building these roads will be equivalent to paving over an iconic state natural area. The loss of carbon sequestration from the natural landscape, the heat generated by sun on pavement, plus the additional CO2 and NO2 emitted from increased traffic means these roads will be a major factor in increasing the killer heat already affecting Florida and the Southeast. I don't live where one of these roads will go, but I will be affected, as will millions of others, by their contribution to climate change. No build is the only option. That's it.
Thank you, Bill. Dale Gillis from Sebring, Florida is next, and you are unmuted. Dale Gillis, you are unmuted. Next up is Joni Moran from Florida. You are unmuted. You may need to self-unmute.
Hi, I don't have like a prepared statement, but I did want to express that I am in opposition of the bill. I live in a rural area of Florida, and we just recently had a toll road extended into our farmlands, into the literal backyards of people. I see the effect, and I can see the effect that this will have. So, no build. Thank you.
Thank you, Joni. Next up is Drew Martin from Lake Worth, Florida. Next up is Richard Pagman from Clearwater, Florida. Next up is Ted Greenwald from High Springs, Florida. Next up is Richard Linder from Northport, Florida. Next up is Jake Zidek from Tampa, Florida. You are unmuted.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, this is Jake Zidek. I'm an environmental scientist, PhD candidate in ecology at USF, and I just want to oppose the toll road. I think it's kind of bizarre, this talk about infrastructure and potential, economic prosperity coming from these toll roads, as if it's just automatic that we're going to prosper, like some kind of Disney-fied version of economics. You know, businesses are going to come in and make money for everyone. That's not how it's going to happen. We know that these short-term businesses that pop up in these strip malls, they close down, and then all this infrastructure is spent on these things, and we have to keep paying for them even when they're defunct. So that's a waste. The this should have never got past the legislator. It just goes to show you how disenfranchised people are, how much they're being, not encouraged to participate in politics. This is just some plan Bill Galvano had, and he knows some developers, and they can suck a lot of money out of the state, helping them make money. So yeah, this is just socialism for the rich. All this infrastructure stuff won't help people. It'll just be money spent, to help these people make more money. So yeah, I suggest no build. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. Next up is Akia Andrews from Sebastian, Florida. You are unmuted, but you are self-muted if you will unmute yourself.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Yes, hi, my name is Kay Andrews. I live in Sebastian, Florida. I was born and raised on Florida's East Coast. Between the ages of 21 and 35, I actually lived in Germany, but we moved back so that my son, who will be 4 in June, can experience Florida's unique ecosystems. Many people have already spoken out against the Southwest Central Florida Connector's negative and deadly impact on the Florida panther. I absolutely agree with them. However, I'd like to draw your eye to some of Florida's lesser known jewels in the Lake Wales Ridge, which has already lost over 85% of its unique upland plant communities. The Lake Wales Ridge is home to the federally endangered sandlace and scrub blazing star, both of whose flowers are as striking as their names suggest. And then there's scrub sisyphus, considered extinct for decades, till it was found again in the 80s in just a handful of public and private places. Scientists and citizen volunteers are now working tirelessly to reestablish scrub sisyphus in other areas of the Lake Wales Ridge that it used to call home before it really is lost forever. These are just 3 examples of at least 20 of Florida's 47 threatened or endangered vascular plants that occur on the Lake Wales Ridge. To put that into perspective, the Lake Wales Ridge makes up less than 1% of the landmass of the state of Florida, but is home to 40% of Florida's federally listed plants. All 20 of these are endemic to the Lake Wales Ridge, meaning they occur nowhere else on Earth. All of them suffer from loss of habitat due to rapid and ongoing development since the 1950s, and the competing needs of home and business owners with those of the ridge's unique ecosystems to regularly burn. Make no mistake, with new roads comes urban sprawl. If it is built, the proposed Southwest Central Florida Connector will not only negatively impact the Lake Wales Ridge, but also negatively impact the animals that call it home, many of them endemic and threatened or endangered themselves. These include the federally endangered scrub jay, whose scrub habitats are disappearing at an alarming rate throughout Florida. The sand skink, protected as a threatened species under the Federal Endangered Species Act, and the state's only endemic mammal, the Florida mouse. In fact, new species are still being discovered on the ridge. In closing, I don't live near the proposed Southwest Central Florida Connector or its equally misguided sister projects, the Suncoast and Northern Turnpike Connectors, but I care deeply about protecting Florida's unique ecosystems and the plants and animals that call them home. Even if these roads avoid the Lake Wales Ridge and other ecologically sensitive sites that may or may not already be conserved and may or may not have been identified as quote-unquote avoidance areas, new roads constitute major barriers to the movement and survival of Florida's unique plants and animals. For these and more reasons, I urge you, members of this task force, to recommend against further habitat fragmentation in our state, and I implore you to strongly recommend no build. It is the only option. Let's invest in maintaining our present transportation infrastructures instead of roads to ecological ruin. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Adam Morley from St. Augustine, Florida. Next up is Doug Morrison from Babson Park. You are unmuted.
Good morning. My name is Doug Morrison. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I live in Babson Park, which would be about 15 to 20 miles from the proposed route of this tollway. Let's remember that the Southwest Connector was concocted by development and highway construction interests and pushed by Senator Galvano. It was not in the FDOT 5-year plan. It reminds me of the Cross Florida Barge Canal. and the straightening of the Kissimmee River. Both were financial and environmental disasters. The Wekiva Parkway reportedly cost $64 million per mile. If we use that benchmark, the Southwest Connector could cost $9.6 billion. In the age of coronavirus, with massive state and federal budget deficits, we can't afford a sweetheart pork barrel boondoggle like this. Let's leave highway planning to transportation experts, not Florida's legislators and lobbyists. Transportation funds must be prioritized for current projects and infrastructure maintenance. I ask that you choose the no-build alternative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Stephen Turner from Lake Placid, Florida. Stephen, you are unmuted. Stephen Turner, you are unmuted. Next up is Russell Hyatt from Bradenton, Florida. Russell Hyatt, you are unmuted. Next up is Tammy Cook Whedon from Okeechobee, Florida. Next up is John Olson from Fort Lauderdale. Next up is Autumn Martinez from Jacksonville, Florida. Next up is Diane Umpiri from Pembroke Pines. You are unmuted.
Hi, I'm here. Hi. Yeah, my name is Diana Umpierre, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Night Sky Conservancy, which is an affiliate of the International Dark Sky Association with a chapter here in Florida. And I'm still going to insist that on the GIS layers, you guys add something that depicts the light polluted areas that we have in Florida. The reason I am insisting on that is because I really want the task force members to see the terrible impact that having these toll roads will have on the last remaining dark sky areas we have. You know, the nocturnal environment is really important. It's extremely important for, you know, to have dark sky areas for our fireflies, for our bats, for our panthers, heck, even for pollinators and the plants that we have in our farms. And that's not even to count the cultural heritage that we're going to be losing, the inspiration to young people, like the person that spoke earlier. I mean, we're the ones that we're cheating them out of all this. I'm sitting here, you know, right next to my a picture that my son took right here in Collier County, in some of the areas that will be impacted if you were to go ahead and build these roads. FDOT unfortunately has a very lousy record of not protecting the night sky environment. I see that some terrible implementations that they've done right on US 27, on Interstate 75, on US 29, in fact, right next to Panther Habitat, and it is just going to go on. I encourage the task force members to visit my Facebook page, Night Sky Conservancy of Florida, where in the next 2 weeks I hope to post photos to just show you what we're going to be losing, as well as the incredible impact that these toll roads are going to have on that environment. I also like to comment that, we have a record loss of agricultural lands. And I'm just, unbelievable that we keep on thinking of taking more of them out. Instead, our tax dollars should be invested in programs like the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program or the Florida Forever programs, so that we can help tackle the need for conservation lands for wildlife, for tackling pollution, to regenerate our soils, protection of our wetlands. I live in Broward. We never seem to have enough roads. We just keep on having more and more. And this whole thing about, it's an environmental injustice that we keep on putting these toll roads in poor, low-income areas. It's an ongoing issue. It's an environmental injustice. And I please plead to the task force members to please stop this and exit now. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Next up is Robert Lopez from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Next up is Nat Birdsong from Winter Haven, Florida. Next up is Laura Duplain from Tampa, Florida. Next up is Larry Grossman from Sarasota, Florida. You are unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
Oh, okay. Yeah, from Sarasota. I'd like to echo what has been stated. My background is in transportation and land use development for the public sector. And I've seen this too many times, unfortunately, where, the road to ruin. There's many toll roads in the Washington, D.C. area, and they don't pay for themselves. They're very risky, and it really just encourages. It's a bet on or investment in the past and not in the future. And I think this coronavirus has indicated that there's a future without massive congestion and use of roads. There are other ways of communicating. There's other ways of getting information, and it might lead to a different type of roadway that doesn't require the abuse of land and the destruction of agricultural areas, natural resources, and the endangerment of species, which are becoming rarer and rarer. So there's other ways to invest money, and this is not the way to do it. I would encourage that the task force, look at the no-build alternative, and then make some assumptions about growth and how that growth, whether that's realistic. But actually, where to put the money? Where is the money really needed? And let's look at a future that does not involve roadways and land development in areas that are trying to maintain its rural character. Roads are not going to be conducive to economic development. It's going to be conducive to economic ruin. And that's my comment.
Thank you. Next up is Joanna Barron from Tavares, Florida. Next up is Catherine Beck from Tallahassee, Florida. Next up is Jim Lombick from St. Augustine, Florida. Next up is Joyce Palmer from Crystal River, Florida. Next up is Mara Crystal from Gainesville, Florida. Next up is Michael Crow from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. You are unmuted.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of where we were.
Michael Crow, you are unmuted.
Yeah. So how did that go, by the way?
Next up is David Schmidt from Sebring, Florida. Next up is Willie DeLucin from Hawthorne, Florida. Next up is Robert Roscoe from Hamden, Connecticut. You are unmuted, but you are self-muted. Robert Roscoe from Hamden, Connecticut. Next up is Sarah Mapes from Sarasota, Florida. You're unmuted. Sarah, you did not enter a PIN. If you would like to speak, hang up, call back in and enter the PIN, and we will call you on the next round. Next up is Paul Douglas from Fort Myers, Florida. Next up is John Wade from Inverness, Florida. Next up is Chris McCurdy from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Next up is Carl Hildebrand from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Next up is Kevin Godsey from Sanibel, Florida. Next up is Mark McQueen from Panama City, Florida. Next up is Darla Letourneau from Sanibel, Florida. You are unmuted.
Yes, this is Darla Letourneau, and I agree that this road project should not go forward, especially with the COVID-19 situation. And I think that the state ought to be redoing their estimates of income from the toll roads, because you'll find that it's not valid anymore, and you really need to start over. But it's amazing to me that the plug has not been pulled on this project immediately, and it really should be presented in the special session, because our current transportation spending is inadequate, and it's going to be decreasing our revenues to do transportation could be 20 to 40% reduction, and we can't do both. I mean, we have not enough money for maintenance of existing roads and projects that have been online for state funds at the local level, and this is just not needed, and it never was, and now it's really shocking that the state wouldn't pull the plug on this. So I hope that cooler heads prevail. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Meredith Budd from Naples, Florida. And you are unmuted.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. There is an echo, but go ahead.
All right. Let's see if I can. Okay, she just missed the other one. So I'm gonna try again. Did that help the echo?
Yes. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Thank you so very much. My name is Meredith Budd. I'm with the Florida Wildlife Federation. I too have previously commented, and the Federation has commented at previous meetings. Typically, the Florida Department of Transportation is responsible for planning improvements and construction of Florida roads. MCORS, however, was introduced by lawmakers and was not included in any of the major Department of Transportation plans. These are not needs as identified by transportation planners and experts. Also, there has been no formal feasibility study to assess the widespread ecological damage and impacts to the agricultural areas in the most rural parts of the state. Also, these road projects are inconsistent with federal, state, and local conservation initiatives and will exacerbate the current water quality crisis that we already have here in Florida, which is certainly something that should be prioritized for action and funding ahead of these proposed toll roads, especially in these very uncertain times when our state is diverting dollars to pandemic relief. Now is not the time to continue full speed ahead with the MCORS process. There are infrastructure needs on existing roads across the state that have long been included in the Department of Transportation's plans. And if there's funding available, these are the infrastructure needs that should be pursued. And the only responsible step forward for MCORS is to pursue the no-build alternative option. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Next up is Erica McCaughey from Bonita Springs, Florida. You are unmuted. It looks like you accidentally hung up. We will circle back to Erica. Next up is Larry Schwartz from Ponte Vedra, Florida. Next up is Martha Gumeth. Next up is Carol Pratt from Naples, Florida. You are unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello? Okay. I've attended several of your meetings and I've seen no plans for alternatives to the toll roads. You've provided no other options to alleviate traffic problems. So from my perspective, it's Floridians, you get these toll roads or you get nothing. From the beginning, it seems that FDOT has had it's a done deal attitude. Is there a plan where the billions of dollars, the ingenuity, and all the other resources dedicated to the toll roads would be instead dedicated to improving existing infrastructure above and beyond what's already slated for existing infrastructure? And incidentally, working on existing infrastructure also provides jobs. That seems to be a fallback every time to win people over. As I've said before, Florida has a pattern and practice of building roads in the areas open up to development and urban sprawl ensues. It is not realistic to think that these toll roads can be constructed and they won't impact Florida's environment or flora or fauna. There will be wildlife underpasses, but will they just go from one suburb to another? And do you honestly think bulldozers will stop for gopher tortoises or bird rookeries? Again, there's a pattern in practice. No, they don't. Incidental take permits will be gained from the federal government, and nothing will stop the heavy equipment from destroying what is now pristine Florida habitat. The broadband and poverty pros you've touted make no sense. Why would new roads where there are no towns, no people, help people get broadband or improve poverty? This would be true if funds were steered towards existing infrastructure. So much, excuse me, so much is unprecedented in current times here and around the world. We've heard that several times this morning. In light of all that's going on in the world, is it really a good idea to tear down trees and lay down asphalt? Not only will you be taking something irreplaceable from our children and future generations, you've also placed no faith in their ability to solve this generation's problems. There's no hope, there's no faith. With something so important, why is this in the fast lane? Honestly, 3 minutes is not even close to being enough time to fully vet this issue. We just get our 3 little minutes for something that will impact Florida forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Next up is Abe Levy from Bonita Springs. Okay, before we call the next person, we just wanted to send a reminder that you will hear a chime at 30 seconds and then at the end mark of the 3 minutes. Next up is Rhonda Rolfe from Clewiston, Florida. You are unmuted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello? Okay. My name is Rhonda Rolfe. I live in Broward County and in Hendry County. It's my Hendry County love that encourages me to talk about this process, because we, and to the north of us, have the last remaining unspoiled Florida, which, as one of the previous speakers just said, can never be replaced once it is paved over and sprawled over. I have to say that this process has been covert and disrespectful to the public from the very start, and I truly believe that it has everything to do with Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis' funder, Thomas Petterfy, and his ownership of over half of poor Taylor County, Florida, and other large business investors in the area who stand to gain a lot of money as their property value increases. Florida is known not just as an example of bad planning, but actually anti-planning, and this proposal continues and exacerbates the sprawl that Florida is sadly famous for. Most of my work involves climate issues, and it is clear that this low-lying peninsular Florida needs to plan for migration from the coast. But we should not be taking this opportunity to increase sprawl, but we should be using this opportunity to do truly smart, climate-positive planning. If Governor DeSantis and Senator Galvano want to leave a positive legacy, they need to propose real climate-positive solutions rather than just more of the same development disasters. And I have so many more things to say about this, but I do want to ask a question, and that is, how will adding 300 miles of mobility up a currently undeveloped area of Florida contribute to the transmission and the spread of coronavirus and the morbidity and mortality of the COVID-19? Has this impact been analyzed, even if by Florida Department of Health? I would like an answer to that question, and I don't know how such questions might be answered. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. Next up is Bill Keating from Miami Beach, Florida. Next up is Karen Shear from Fort Myers, Florida. Next up is Carolyn Chirali from Tallahassee, Florida. Next up is Catherine Elof from Tampa, Florida. You are unmuted.
Hi, I've been a Florida resident on and off since 1969, and I've driven all over the state, and my view is that we do not need these new roads. However, we do need the environment and wildlife to survive if humanity is to survive. These roads will only make our state hotter and encourage driving, thereby increasing pollution and global warming. The billions of taxpayer dollars for this project would be better spent on repairing existing roads, conserving wildlife habitat, and developing rural broadband. I've noticed that pretty much every public comment has been against these roads, so I'm hoping our representatives will be aware of that and listening to us, the general public, and please do not build these roads.
Thank you, Catherine. Next up is Adrian Barman from Hollywood, Florida. Next up is Tim Nowak from Odessa, Florida. Next up is Noah Handley from Lake Placid, Florida. Next up is A.G. Kahiki from Sanibel, Florida. Next up is J.T. Shields from Tallahassee, Florida. Next up is Matthew Schwartz from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. You are unmuted.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, all. Hope everybody's well. And thanks to all for some of the excellent comments I'm hearing here. I wanted to make a comment to my friend from the Florida Native Plant Association who talked about these roads being built. By the way, my name is Matthew Schwartz. I'm with the South Florida Wildlands Association, and we're a small local organization dedicated to protecting wildlife and habitat in the greater Everglades. When he talked about these roads being built to accommodate sprawl, I think that's not the way Senator Galvano put it. He said these roads are being built to encourage sprawl. He didn't put it exactly that way. He said we want growth to come to the rural parts of our state. So basically, I would translate that to these roads are the red carpet of sprawl. And that's what they're going to lead to. We're not just talking about the impacts of roads, but as everybody who lives in Florida knows, anytime you build a new highway, developments go up alongside of it. So we're going to have numerous impacts from this project if it actually goes to completion. I know I don't have a lot of time. I do want to bring a lot of talk about the Florida Panther. I'm going to talk a bit about the Florida Panther, but also preface that by saying when we talk about the panther, we're talking about not only our state animal and an endangered species, but an umbrella species. So whenever we talk about the panther, we're talking about all the native plants and animals that live in that same habitat. So that's what we call it, an umbrella species. Protecting panther habitat protects essentially the Amazon of North America, which is what Southwest Florida is. 2 studies have already been done, and I'm not sure, I'm not hearing anything. I came to this meeting specifically, I wanted to see, again, the avoidance area, and now I'm seeing the attraction areas. There's no attention to science whatsoever in this planning process. 2 scientific studies. Fracas et al., Landscape Analysis of the Adult Florida Panther, was written in 2015. I'm going to read a quote from that, better than I can say it. Because there is less panther habitat remaining than previously thought, we recommend that all remaining breeding habitat in South Florida should be maintained, and the current panther range should be expanded into South Central Florida. We're doing the opposite here. There's no science behind this whatsoever. The earliest study on panther habitat is called How Much is Enough? Landscape Scale Conservation for the Florida Panther, and that basically defined the primary, secondary, and dispersal zones for the panther. Again, all of these areas are being developed by the project. Am I out of time? I can't tell.
23 seconds.
I don't know. Okay, well, basically, I would say if this process is not designed to look at the science, there are other processes that will. Obviously, that's where we're going to have to take this venue. FDOT is committed to building these things. To my colleagues on this task force, recommend, speak up, talk to science, tell them don't build this thing. And thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Daryl Borowicz from Tallahassee, Florida. Next up is Donna Gilman Rodriguez from Lakeland, Florida. You are unmuted. Donna Gilman Rodriguez, you are unmuted. Okay, we will circle back. Next is Ryan Orgera from Sanibel, Florida. Next up is Kathleen Fatica from Asteria, Florida. Kathleen, it looks like you need to enter your PIN to speak. If you hang up and call back in, you can enter your PIN. We will circle back. Next up is Naveen Nawe from St. Petersburg, Florida. Next up is Kevin Hill from Asteria, Florida. You are unmuted.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Kevin Hill. I live in Estero. My family has been here in Lee County for over 100 years. My wife's family has been in the state of Florida since it belonged to the Spanish. And that unique perspective, I think, gives us some opportunity to recognize some really big mistakes that have been made by state government, by local municipalities, county governments, in the way that this state has grown. And I think that this project may possibly be the biggest mistake of all, because it's so widespread and so has the potential to really negatively impact the future of this state, and especially the rural communities, rural character, agriculture, which is the underpinning of this state behind tourism and development, unfortunately, but it's still going. And even during this crisis that we have going on right now, farmers are still farming. And so there's large landowners that are willing to give up agriculture in favor of new towns scattered all over the interior of our state. And I think it's a big mistake. And I just want to go on the record as saying that, and that I hope this doesn't go through, and I hope the no build option is what ends up happening. I trust that it will. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Stephen Leder from Miami, Florida. You are unmuted. You are self-muted. Please unmute yourself. Kevin Liedner from Miami, Florida. I'm sorry, Stephen Liedner from Miami, Florida. You are unmuted. You are still self-muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you. I was surfing. I have, my name is Stephen. Thank you again for allowing me to speak. And I've been on this call since the public comment started, and it boggles my mind that the task force has been appointed in light of the public comments that I've heard, and the rational comments I've heard, and the science that I've heard, and the citizens' interest in protecting our natural resources. And I just can't, I don't see this other than a rouse. I just can't believe it's even happening. There's no rational reason that this should be going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Janet Barrow from Denellen, Florida. Next up is Philip Douglas from Estero, Florida. Next up is Eleanor Blitzer from Fort Myers, Florida. Next up is Christopher Bremo from Clearwater, Florida. You are unmuted. Christopher Bremo, you are unmuted. Okay, we will circle back. Linda Stewart from Sarasota, Florida. Next up is Julene Beck from Miami, Florida. Next up is Charles Stone from Fort Myers, Florida. Next up is Debbie Culp from Fort Myers, Florida, and you are unmuted. You are self-muted, Debbie Culp. If you will unmute. Debbie Culp, you are unmuted. If you will unself-mute. Okay, we will circle back. Next up is John Jigermer from Tampa, Florida. Next up is Lisa Bramlage from Sarasota, Florida. You are unmuted.
Hi, thank you for allowing public input on this. I am a lifetime Florida resident, and I've just retired from 30 years of both being a park ranger and a land manager for the state of Florida. My concern for these natural areas are they are, as many people have already said, very, very important and the last bastions for listed species and endemic species. Most all of these communities are fire dependent, and one of the big tools that a land manager uses is prescribed fire. Roads equal roadblocks to prescribed fire. One of the things we do in a prescription is we look at the surrounding community, roads, schools, hospitals, to see what smoke impact will be. The beautiful aspect of Central Florida and the Ridge is those areas have been able to be burned, and that's why we still have scrub jays, gopher tortoises, endemic plants there. I believe that this road project is not advisable, and it's really nice to hear Florida residents speaking up against it. I hope to see more of that if we all work together. I think we can block this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Linda Smythe. You are unmuted. You are also self-muted.
Hello, this is Linda Smith, and I'm calling from Jupiter, Florida. I assume you can hear me.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
I encourage everyone to send their comments to the FDOT Listens website. If I was on this task force, I probably would have turned down the volume and started doing other things. So let's make sure our voices are heard. I also encourage everyone to keep reaching out to their senators and ask them to repeal Senate Bill 768. Also, you can obviously call the governor, write letters, and also your congressman. I want to thank you for allowing me to speak. I understood the high-level needs, preservation, and expansion of conservation. We need our greenways for the panthers and the bears. We need our working ranches and farms to feed us. These are economic drivers. I don't see how the roads are going to help that. The other issue was to connect low-income individuals to jobs. So I'm assuming with that in mind, the low-income individuals would have their tolls waived. This is a unique situation, to my knowledge. Low-income people do not get their tolls waived any other place. And who is going to reimburse them for their car insurance, their fuel, and their time spent on these roads to drive to these job centers? With our current coronavirus experience, we understand that there are lots of opportunities for working at home. We need to be emphasizing that. That will also lower the carbon footprint in the state of Florida. We do need to increase their ability to access the broadband network. We need to spend our funds on urban infill. We need to spend our funds on healthcare resiliency. We do not need to rush new roads projects. We do need to maintain our existing infrastructure. We do not need this debacle. Florida is at risk for climate change. I vote no for no build for this. And thank you for your time. I encourage everyone that has already invested hours just in this call to write and talk to their legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Leah Emerson Smith from South Miami. Next up is Wendy Jerkins from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. You are unmuted.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I'm concerned about spending money on this corridor where those resources could be better served in this current pandemic and hopefully the post-pandemic world. The climate crisis and economic inequalities that have been accelerated by the current coronavirus pandemic will not be solved by building this development. put the money and the resources into improving the current and already existing infrastructure. I am a native Floridian and I am alarmed. If the state has been ill-equipped to deal with our current environmental distress, how will it handle the greater environmental impact and distress that would be caused by proceeding with this project? I'm still unclear about who this project is designed to benefit. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. At this point, we're going to circle back through some names that we had called earlier. One moment, please. Next up is Dale Gillis from Sebring, Florida. Dale, you are unmuted. Last call, Dale Gillis from Sebring, Florida. You are unmuted. The next three that we're going to call is Stephen Turner, Russell Hyatt, and Michael Kroll. First up, Stephen Turner. Stephen, you are unmuted.
Yes, I had not expected to speak, so I'll try to be organized about this. So there are three things I want to talk about. One is the future density. This obviously doesn't relate to the current project. It relates to the next phase. But I agree with the man who spoke with respect to the Native Plant Society. I'm not sure that population is going to continue increasing as it has in the past. So I'm not sure there's going to be the need that is anticipated. Second item is water. I think what Hillary Swain from Archbold Biological Station mentioned at the meeting in Sebring about hydrology is critical. I think that we need to consider the example of Route 41 across the Everglades in Dade and Monroe County and its very negative impact on water flow. My expectation is that Route 75, I-75 also did the same thing. If anything is built, hydrology needs to be a primary concern. And that directly impacts the activity of this, this group in the next few days, in the next few months. The third thing is habitat and wildlife corridors. If you look at the acquisition of land along the Lake Wales Ridge and the easements that have gone along with it, a lot of the focus has been on Lake Wales Ridge, developing wildlife corridors. Clearly, if you look at the distribution of preserved lands and protected lands, that job is not finished. Now, it is my feeling that there's far more ecologically important areas to the west where this road is proposed. And I think it's the focus on ecological preservation has been on Lake Wales Ridge because of a large number of endangered species. Excuse me?
30 seconds.
Thank you. I think we could establish similar concerns about these areas to the west, these broader areas. And I think this committee needs to think a great deal about wildlife and both flora and fauna movements and try to take those into account.
Time is up.
Thank you.
Next up is Russell Hyatt. Moving on. Next up is Michael Kroll. Michael Kroll, you are unmuted.
Thank you. No comments at this time.
Thank you, Michael. Moving on. Next up. Next three will be Robert Roscoe, Sarah Mapes, Erica McCaughey. First up, Robert Roscoe. Next is Sarah Mapes. Next is Erica McCaughey. Next three is Donna Gelman Rodriguez, Kathleen Fatica, Christopher Bremo. Donna Gelman Rodriguez. Next is Kathleen Fatica. Next is Christopher Bremo. Christopher, you are unmuted. Christopher Bremo, you are unmuted. Last call, Christopher Bremo, you are unmuted. And our last speaker for public comment is Debbie Culp. Debbie Culp, you are unmuted. Debbie, you are self-muted. Please unmute. Last call, Debbie Culp, if you'll unmute. Okay, this concludes our webinar. Thank you for joining.